Well, I can't say why I was chosen to ride the Shadowlands Express. Why me and not the countless others who have sinned during their mortal lives? Perhaps all will be forced to face their demons in the end. I can't say for sure. But clearly, the odyssey I was thrust into was not of my choosing. I wouldn't have boarded the ghost train if I'd known the horrors which lay before me, but despite the terror I've lived through and the people I've lost, I strangely feel like I'm a better man because of it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. There's not much I can tell you about me. I'm not here to recount my life story. I never thought of myself as a bad person, but I've done bad things which resulted in people getting hurt. I've worked in the corporate world for most of my life, and never had a problem with screwing people over to advance my career. My company has a culture of working hard, playing hard, and I was one of the greatest proponents of this hedonistic lifestyle. On the fateful night when I boarded the express, I had been out of town, partying and drinking hard before making a bad dash for the last train home. Honestly, I remember little about the sequence of events that night, as it all passed by in a drunken blur. I vaguely recall running through an abandoned train station, buying a paper ticket from a dead-eyed attendant, sprinting down the platform, and jumping inside the carriage seconds before the doors slammed shut. I was sweating by the time I entered a nondescript train carriage, but I felt satisfied because I'd made it just in the nick of time. I remember smiling as I collapsed down upon a cushioned seat at an empty booth, hearing the whistle being blown as the train slowly pulled away from the platform, gaining speed as it exited the station and proceeded along the tracks. I felt exhausted at that moment, physically drained by the night of drinking and the dash to the carriage. So I loosened my tie, wiped the sweat off my brow, and tried my best to keep my eyes open. I didn't want to fall asleep because then I'd surely miss my stop, but try as I might, I simply couldn't fight the overwhelming urge, and slowly but surely I lost the battle, my eyes closing as I drifted off into a deep slumber. I don't know how long I was out for. It could have been minutes or hours, but I guess my sleepy interlude was long enough to allow the sinister powers to work their dark magic. I do remember what I dreamt during that brief slumber. Surreal, but surprisingly vivid dreams which chilled me to my core. I saw my ex-wife in a dark place beyond my reach and suffering alone. Next, I found myself alone in the train carriage, running from end to end but finding no one who could help me. As my nightmare continued, I slammed my fists against the carriage door, screaming as I desperately tried to escape my rolling metal prison, but my efforts were to no avail, and I was trapped inside, alone and afraid. I was awake in an instant, gasping for air as I shot up from my seat. I scanned from side to side, somewhat relieved to find that I was still inside the train carriage and had simply suffered a bad dream. So I adjusted my eyes to the harsh strip lights, noting how the brightness inside the carriage compared to the darkness outside the carriage windows. The train was rolling past city streets, but not a light could be seen, not on the roads or any of the buildings. This struck me as odd, but I didn't dwell on it in that moment. Instead, I pulled myself up off the seat and stumbled down the aisle in search of a conductor. My fear at this point was that I'd missed my stop and would end up stranded at a remote station with no means of getting home. That would have been bad enough. But even as I took those first cautious steps down the carpeted aisle, I felt that something wasn't right. Call it a sixth sense or a primal fear of terrors long forgotten, but I believed I was in a strange, hostile place. Glancing back and forth, I found I was alone in the carriage. This was disconcerting, but not necessarily surprising, as I was riding on a late-night train. The interior was unremarkable. Quite ordinary, in fact. The blue upholstered, soft chairs were set around plastic tables, and tannoy speakers and CCTV cameras were visible on the ceiling above me. I could hear the steady mechanical hum of the engine and the movement under my feet as the vehicle sped ever onwards. But where we were headed, I could not say. It was only then that I looked outside the carriage windows, observing the darkness on either side of the speeding train. I soon confirmed that there were no lights emanating from the outside. None whatsoever. Every building and every street were shrouded in darkness, with the only illumination coming from the train itself. I couldn't see any cars or vehicles either. In fact, there were no signs of people on the outside, and it seemed like we were traveling through an abandoned city, devoid of life. Now, how could this be? I asked myself. Perhaps there was a citywide power cut. That was a possibility, but as I stood in the aisle, I looked outwards, and I began to feel increasingly uneasy as the scenes rolling by changed for the worse. Whereas before I saw tidy streets and well-maintained buildings, before long I was confronted by ruins and crumbling structures, a decaying urban landscape with weeds and vines slowly taking back the land. I was left gobsmacked, my jaw dropping and blood freezing as I observed an ever-deteriorating scene. I knew this city had its rundown areas, but nothing like this. I didn't understand what I was seeing, or know where I was, and this uncertainty was truly terrifying. I felt so alone in that moment, like I'd been ripped out of the world and dropped somewhere dark, twisted, and bizarre, somewhere I didn't belong. Breaking myself from the fear-induced paralysis, I turned away from the window and slowly made my way down the aisle, heading for the doorway which led to the next carriage. More than anything, in that moment I wanted to find someone else, so I wouldn't have to face this nightmare alone. As it happened, I did stumble upon other passengers, but unfortunately my new companions were just as confused and frightened as I was, and none of us yet knew why we were here, on board the fabled Shadowlands Express. I'm sorry. Could I have a minute? Okay, thank you.